In this lesson, we'll be looking at subtraction of fractions. We have three objectives. Our first one will be to subtract fractions with a common denominator. Then we will subtract fractions without a common denominator. And then we will have applications using subtraction of fractions. So let's begin by looking at our rules for subtracting fractions. Our steps will be to find a common denominator, if necessary. We will then subtract the numerators, keeping the same denominator, and we will simplify if possible. Now what you should be recognizing here is that subtracting fractions is an awfully lot like adding fractions. We're going to need that common denominator, and you do need to remember that the two times you need a common denominator are for addition and subtraction of fractions, not for multiplying and dividing. So let's look at an example. If I give you 1 over 6 minus 2 over 6, notice that I was very kind to you this time, and I started you out with a common denominator. We already have the 6's that match, and so we simply need to do the subtraction. I'm going to revert to the checkbook method that we used way back when we were adding and subtracting integers. And so what I'll write next is 1 over 6, and remember how we added the opposite? Well, that's exactly what we do even when it's fractions. So notice I changed the subtraction to addition, and the opposite of a positive 2 is negative 2. Now I'm ready to ask myself that question. If I put $1 in the bank and I write a check for $2, what do I have left? And the answer is I'm $1 in the hole, so I would end up with a negative 1 over 6. Remember, the denominator stays the same. Let's look at some more examples of subtracting with a common denominator. If I give you 12 over 16 minus 5 over 16, I realize that I'm going to put in a step here that some of you don't need to write anymore, but I'm going to show you how I add the opposite, and then once again use the checkbook method. I deposited $12 in the bank, wrote a check for 5, and so I have $7 left. My final answer would be 7 over 16. What about if I had 7 over 20 minus 9 over 20? Once again, they have a common denominator, so I will simply add the opposite. I put $7 in the bank, I wrote a check for $9. I am $2 in the hole, so I now have a negative 2 over 20. This time I do need to notice that this one can be simplified some more. And I'm going to do that the same way I always do, by factoring and then removing common factors. So in the numerator I have negative 2, and in the denominator I have 2 times 10. Remember, I can remove these common factors, and I'll be left with a negative 1. So my final answer is negative 1 over 10. One more example would look like this: 3 over 16 minus negative 14 over 16. I'm going to begin by adding the opposite since I already have common denominators. When I add the opposite, I get 3 over 16 plus 4 over 16. I simply add the numerators, and I get 17 over 16. Now what I'd like to do now is let's look at some problems that do not have common denominators and see if we can work them. So if I give you 3 over 4 minus 5 over 16, the first step we need to do is get a common denominator. Now remember, we're trying to find something that we can multiply one of them by so that they will match. So in this case, if I take the first fraction and I notice that I can multiply this by 4, that would give me 16. But remember, we'll do it to the top and the bottom both, just like we did in addition. So when I do that step, it gives me 12 over 16 minus 5 over 16. Now it's just a subtraction problem. I will add my opposite. And so now I have $12 in the bank, and I wrote a check for 5, which leaves me with 7 over 16. Our next problem is 3 over 5 minus 7 over 4. Now this time we won't be able to multiply one of these by something and make us a common denominator, but we can multiply each of them by something. I would suggest this one by 4 and this one by 5. That will give us a 20 for both denominators. When we do that, we multiply the top and the bottom both of the first one by 4 and the top and the bottom both of the second one by 5. I now have 12 over 20 minus 35 over 20. Once again, I will add the opposite, which leaves me with 12 over 20 plus a negative 35 over 20. That means I put $12 in the bank. I wrote a check for 35, so I'm definitely going to be in trouble, to the tune of negative 23. So my final answer is negative 23 over 20. And let's look at one more. 3 over 16 minus a negative 7 over 8. First of all, notice you do not have a common denominator, and I hope you're noticing that we could multiply this one by 2 to make that happen. Well, when we do that step, we get 3 over 16 minus negative 7 times 2 in the numerator and 8 times 2 in the denominator. I'm going to do the multiplication and add the opposite all in one step here. So when I do the multiplication here, I get a negative 14. Well, when I add the opposite of that, I'm going to be adding a positive 14. So I'm now ready to simply do my addition, and I get 17 over 16. I'm going to give you some practice problems now. I would suggest that you stop the video and make sure that you can do these 3 problems successfully. When you're finished, come back and we'll check your answers. The first problem is negative 3 over 5 minus 2 over 5. Notice this time I was very kind and started you off with a common denominator. So I simply need to add the opposite, and I'll be ready to add these fractions. When I add the numerators, I get negative 5, and remember the denominator stays the same. So I have negative 5 over 5, which, let me remind you, is a negative 1. Our next problem is 3 over 21 minus 5 over 7. The first thing you have to notice is that the denominators are not the same. I would need to multiply this one by 3 to make that happen. When I do that step, it'll look like this, and at the same time I'm going to add the opposite. So I now have 3 over 21 plus negative 5 times 3 over 7 times 3. That leaves me with 3 over 21 plus a negative 15 over 21, and I'm right back to the checkbook again. I put $3 in the bank. I wrote a check for 15, so I'm definitely in trouble. I have a negative 12 over 21. Can I reduce this or simplify it? I would factor it. The way I factored was negative 3 times 4, and the denominator is 3 times 7. When I remove those common factors, and let me remind you that leaves you with a negative 1 right here, the numerator becomes negative 4 and the denominator becomes 7. Our final problem was negative 5 over 12 minus 15 over 24. Once again, you do not have a common denominator, but hopefully you see a quick way to make that happen by multiplying with 2's. I now have negative 5 times 2 over 12 times 2, and then I will add the opposite so it becomes plus negative 15 over 24. When I do those multiplications, I get negative 10 over 24 plus negative 15 over 24. Checkbook method would tell me I just wrote 2 bad checks, and so I'm now in the hole, negative 25, and so my final answer is negative 25 over 24. Let's look now at an application using fractions. A fruit salad contains 5/8 of a quart of strawberries, 1/4 quart of raspberries, and 5/16 quart of blueberries. If 3/4 quart of the fruit salad has been eaten, how much remains? I'll be honest with you, I would do this problem in a couple of steps. The first thing I would want to find is how much fruit salad did I have total. So to do that, I would need to add the strawberry part, the raspberry part, and the blueberry part. When I do that, I have 5 over 8 plus 1 over 4 plus 5 over 16. I need to get a common denominator, and once again there are 3 of those items here, but you should be able to see what we can multiply by to arrive at a common denominator. If I multiplied this one by 2 and this one by 4, all of them would be 16s, and so that would be a common denominator, and then I would be able to add. Let's look at the step for doing that. I have 5 over 8, and I multiply the numerator and the denominator both by 2, plus 1 over 4, and I multiply both the numerator and the denominator by 4. And then I have plus 5 over 16, and remember, it already is a 16, so I don't need to do anything to it. I then get 10 over 16 plus 4 over 16 plus 5 over 16. When I add those numerators, I get 19 over 16. This cannot be simplified, and so I now know how much fruit salad I have. I have 19 over 16 quarts of fruit salad. What I now want to do is take away the part that has been eaten. So it would be 19 over 16 minus the 3/4 quart that has been eaten. Notice you do not have a common denominator here, but you could get one by simply multiplying top and bottom both of this, by 4. I'm going to do that and add the opposite all at the same time. So I have 9 over 16 plus negative 3 times 4 over 4 times 4. When I do those multiplications, I get 9 over 16 plus negative 12 over 16. I now have a common denominator and I can add the numerators. Using my checkbook method once again, I put $19 in the bank and I wrote a check for 12. That leaves me with 7 over 16. Now let me remind you, what is this 7 over 16? That would be 7 over 16 quarts of fruit salad. That's all I have for you in this lesson. I hope you're still doing okay, and if you have questions, I'll need to hear from you. Talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.